I don't have any evidence. I'm just skeptical of all sides.
Well, that's not That's not. I mean, I'm skeptical of all sides.
Yeah.
That's not skepticism. That's cynicism. Skepticism holds that you do not believe something or accept something until there's sufficient evidence. Now, you may be appropriately skeptical and just you don't have the requisite understanding to be able to assess the evidence and come to a conclusion. But in that case, you're not a conspiracy theorist. You're just undecided.
Yeah. And if that's all you're doing, if you're honest enough to admit, well, I just don't have enough facts at hand to form an opinion one way or another, you should at least say that, and you shouldn't identify, because you'll give people the wrong impression of yourself by saying, oh, well, I kind of believe 9/11 truth claim. Well, because that's an entirely different, kettle of fish right there. There are structural engineers out there who have addressed some of the truther claims, and they'll explain how, yes, indeed, fire can melt steel. But until you have all the facts at hand, the wise thing to do, the properly skeptical thing to do, is not declare yourself to have committed one way or another. So I would just say, look at both sides and get that information from actual scientists and engineers and what have you who have addressed some of the claims of the 9/11 truth movement and really try to understand them. Otherwise, yeah. But thanks. But yeah, that's a skepticism question, not specifically an atheism question.
Yeah, and the thing about it that baffles me is granted, Russell and I have been hard on conspiracy theorists in the past, and in particular, truthers. But if you go back, none of us were sitting here saying we support the quote-unquote official story, and it's absolutely correct. All we were doing in any of those cases was saying, you're making a statement about what actually happened that you're not providing evidentiary support for, and we think that that's wrong. You're certainly not going to convince us. But.
And we have, you can go ahead. We have heard from people who are 9/11 truthers who take the view that the official story should be denied or should be viewed with skepticism simply because it is the official story.
Yeah.
But that is an irrational basis to be a believer in the conspiracy theory version of events of that day. It does not follow that simply because something is the official story, it must be untrue. It must be a cover-up.
Yeah.
So
as a reminder, the telephone number has changed. It's 512-472-2255. It's at the bottom of the screen. And after the show's over today, we'll be going to dinner, as normal, at Threadgill's, 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person in the Austin area is welcome to come down and have dinner, drinks, whatever. And that's true for most of our other events as well.
May I bring something up really quickly?
Certainly.
Because we have had some emails from actually a few of our viewers about this, and so I think they make a good point. When we tell any of our callers that what you're doing is making an argument from ignorance, we're not saying you're stupid, you're ignorant. The argument from ignorance defines a specific logical fallacy, which is that because we do not have all of the facts, because we are ignorant of all of the facts, because we don't know the real answer, therefore, whatever I choose to believe, whether it's God or a conspiracy or this, that, or the other, is the logical fallback position. That's fallacious thinking, and that's what the argument from ignorance says. It's like two people are walking around and they see this strange little dot in the sky, and one guy says, what is that? And the other guy says, I have no idea what that is. And he says, oh, well, because you don't know what that is, it must be an alien spaceship. It must be a UFO from the Andromeda Galaxy. Yeah, because you don't really know what it is is logical to assume that that's what it is, because that's what I want to believe. That's the argument from ignorance. And that's what we mean.
More specifically, argument from ignorance is, you can't prove that this is wrong, therefore I am justified in believing.
Yeah.
And that's where the problems come in.
Okay, so just so everyone knows that's what that means.
Yeah. It isn't the argument from stupidity.
Yeah.
It's like Ray.
Yeah. If you are stupid, we'll say that, but that's a whole different thing.
We have Mohammed in Alexandria. How are you?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, am I on the air?
You are.
From the other end of the world. How are you?
Hi, fine, thanks. How are you?
Fine.
I just wanted to say that I've been watching your show for a long time on YouTube, and I absolutely love it. I can't believe that something like this is real. Like, we need something like this in the Middle East.
Believe it.
I mean, oh my God, how badly do we need something like this here?
Well, I've been to Alexandria, but I'm not going to come back over there and set up the show there. You can set up a show there.
Unfortunately, not a few hundreds. Can that actually be at all possible? Yeah, I just wanted to say what a great job you guys are doing, but
well, thank you.
Why are all the people who are calling you people who don't seem to do any research whatsoever. I've been looking on YouTube for people with very good arguments for the existence of God, and there indeed are. Well, there are some good arguments. One of my favorite arguments is the argument from reason. Have you heard? Are you familiar with this argument?
Sure. It's also what we've been talking about before, which would be the transcendental argument for the existence of God, which builds up from the fact that there is reason and logical absolutes too. There must have been some author of this.
Well, I believe that reason and rationality and all that can be perfectly explained using evolution.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And nothing more than that.
Right.
I mean, more than that, but I can see how evolution can be applied to explain all these things. Anyway, sorry, what I really wanted to talk about was how to try to convince people that atheism is not a bad thing, especially here in Islam, where we hear mosque prayers 5 times a day through gigantic megaphones. And I live in Alexandria, which is actually the birthplace of Christianity. We have such sharp divides here between Muslims and Christians, and one group sometimes attacks the other really brutally. Most of the time it's Muslims against Christians. But how do I introduce my friends to this kind of secular thinking without them completely thinking that I'm evil?
Okay. I would say that first what you would have to do is ascertain, you'd have to look at the individual you're talking to and ascertain to what degree they are invested in some of the emotional aspects of their religious indoctrination, which essentially teach them. People with these kinds of belief systems are conditioned right off the bat to believe that anyone who does not hold their beliefs, does not share their beliefs, has a different outlook, rejects we heard it from our earlier caller from London. You know, if you don't believe what I believe, you are evil. And so you have to sort of get down to the degree to which the person you're talking to thinks that way. Oh, if you don't believe what I believe, you're evil. Because that right there is an emotional investment. They're looking at you and they're seeing, you know, Exorcist, right? And you have to sort of get them out of that mindset and just say, no, look, I'm a person, I think differently from you, and can we actually talk about ideas here without you constantly seeing, you know, a demon when you look at me, or some sort of devil-influenced, villain. So that is kind of what you have to get around, that there is the whole emotional and sort of gut instinct aspect of religious indoctrination that supersedes and clouds the reasoning faculty. And so this is why you have these horrible religious differences. This is why you have Christians and Muslims and Jews just, you know, going at it like this, because they don't see the other groups as human beings. They see them as, you know, devils and apostates and sinners and people deserving of retribution, and not as other human beings. And so that's what you got to get around first.
Well, in the case of Islam, I don't know how familiar you are with our principles, but Muslims see Jews and Christians as previous receivers of the revelation of that same God that came down to us. So basically what Islam is doing is like, it's saying, oh yeah, all your prophets, the Jew prophets, are all part of our faith. Muhammad was preaching the same message we did, so Islam has this brilliant cover-up to allow itself to monopolize the monotheistic faith, and the Prophet Muhammad is very famous for saying, I am the last prophet. And so, like, I don't know what to tell people. I want to know if I can become an atheist. Why can't other people? For me, it was just a matter of reading and thinking about it. It was just thinking about it, like, why on earth would God choose Arabic of all possible human languages? And why would God choose that time and that place? Do people not think about these things? That the same God that created the galaxies, the Andromeda galaxy, the color purple, and all this, he speaks in rhymes. He speaks Arabic. He has good Arabic spelling. I just don't get it. I don't know how somebody could eat up the possibility that God wrote a book.
And evidently, before that, he was inspiring in Aramaic, and then before that in Hebrew. I think if you spend a lot of time focusing on how you manage to escape, you can find some clues at least to what sort of arguments you might want to make. But this idea that Islam is somehow protected because it manages to fold in these previous two Abrahamic traditions is just kind of nonsense. It's kind of you know, surface theology. In much the same way that, you know, you could say Christianity is Judaism 2.0. It is and it isn't. And there's a reason why Jews don't accept that Jesus was God, that he wasn't the Messiah, that he didn't fulfill prophecy. And when people in theological circles actually start talking about this, now you can get somewhere. But meanwhile, you've got Christians charging on ahead saying, oh, no, he fulfilled every single prophecy. Every prophecy's come true. This is all good. He's definitely God. The Jews just somehow haven't managed to see it. God love them. And they got their own deal with God, and we'll work that out later. And then the Muslims say, oh, yes, and it was all right, and Jesus was a prophet. It's clear in the New Testament tradition that Jesus wasn't a prophet. He's not portrayed as a prophet. He's portrayed as divine.
As the Son.
As divine, as being God. Now, if Islam comes out and says that Jesus was a prophet, that's the only way that is being accommodating is at like the kindergarten level of theology. It's actually an affront. It should be an affront to Christians who think that Jesus is divine for Muslims to be saying, oh, he's just a prophet. And it should be an affront to Muslims who think he was a prophet for Christians to be saying that Jesus is divine. And I think that's in some areas that's a significant point of contention. And yet, somehow or another, we have people who have managed to adopt either religion out of the other because they think they're somehow connected. It's because people don't seem to know very much about what it is that they believe or why, what it is these religions say.
No, a lot of people have no clue, have zero clue about what their people say. A lot of Muslims have never read the Quran from beginning to end, and even the ones that do, they don't understand it. This kind of Arabic is really old. I mean, the Arabic we speak today, every day, is modern, standardized Arabic and dialects and colloquialisms and all that. The language of the Quran is ancient, absolutely ancient.
And modern students in English classes aren't going to understand Shakespeare without guidance. Mm-hmm. I mean, that we're talking about just how much English has changed in a handful of years.
Exactly, just the idioms and everything. Yeah. It's completely different. And to answer your question about why do people think that they always think that God would speak in their language and have their language? You have to remember when you think of it in terms of that to each believer, what God really is an idealized projection of the believer's self-image that they have projected onto the universe as a whole. Then it's easier to understand why they think that way. So so that's another thing that you have to kind of get around. You're dealing with arguments or beliefs in which the believer is personally, emotionally invested much more than intellectually invested. Because, as you point out, if this were a purely intellectual exercise, they would strive to understand, to read things, study, understand, what have you. And while some believers do that, even the ones who do that, still have that degree of emotional investment. God ultimately ends up being a guy who always agrees with you. He always agrees with your politics. He agrees with your views on sex and marriage and what food you should eat and not, and exactly, that's the amazing thing about God. He just always agrees with you. He's your best pal. That's that whole idealized self-image projection thing. So there's the emotional connection you've got to work around.
What were the key elements of your transition out of Islam?
Is this Matthew?
Yeah.
I just want to say you're like a celebrity to me. So.
Thanks.
Sorry, what was your question?
I wanted to know what were like the key elements, the points that made you think the most, that helped lead you out of Islam.
Well, I was never really as firm as a believer as they get. I mean, my parents are pretty upper middle class, and they speak French and Arabic and stuff. I just started learning English a while ago, and when I read the Quran in English, I was like, this makes a lot less sense in English than it ever did in Arabic. So I was just thinking about why, if God really did exist and he really did want to reveal himself to human beings, why wouldn't he just reveal himself to every single human being on the planet in all languages, say the exact same thing simultaneously to everybody, and tell them to stop fighting each other forever? Is that too much is that ridiculous to imagine? Is that ridiculous to expect that from God?
I think it's a little more effective than a burning bush or a pillar of fire or plagues, and then taking a band of rabble-rousers and giving them the truth to disseminate to everybody else. I mean, I find it absolutely absurd.